You Ascenders know lately I've been putting up some daily primes about what I'm calling our half-century cycle. This began in the early 1970s. There was a man by the name of Mike Oliver. He has quite a exciting past, and he was quite an action-oriented man who got involved with my father back in the early 70s. And I'm going to talk a little bit more give you the fuller story a little bit later in my talk. But this Mike Oliver, he has a past. In fact, I'm going to just call it up real quick here on chat. I'll just read this. Michael Oliver, born as Moses Olitsky in Lithuania, was a real estate millionaire and political activist based in Las Vegas. He is best known for founding the Republic of Minerva, a micronation established on the Minerva Reefs in the South Pacific in 1972. Oliver envisioned creating a libertarian society with minimal government intervention, no taxation, and a free market economy. To achieve this, he formed the Ocean Life Research Foundation, which financed the project. Despite the initial efforts, the Republic of Minerva was short-lived as neighboring Tonga asserted sovereignty over the reefs shortly after the Declaration of Independence. Now, Mike Oliver is most known for that attempt to start a sovereign nation. But I'll tell you a little bit later today how it was actually the project that he was involved with my father in the Turks and Caicos Islands that nearly became the first recognized sovereign new nation, libertarian new country ever. But I'll get more into that a little bit later. First, I want to talk about something a week ago during the All Citizens meeting I began discussing with you about understanding who we are and the leverage we have. You see, I have been meeting with, my son has been meeting with some very important people in this space of free economic zones and chartered cities, with the emphasis of looking at really getting something going on the land basis. Because that's really important. The 10-year goal, I have to keep that out there as such, but I want to accelerate this process. So I've been meeting with some very important, influential people, meeting with some scientists and medical personnel. And by the way, I want to just hold something up here for you all to see. This is The Death of Death. It's a book I encourage all of you to get. It's on Amazon. I think it's about $26. The author of this there's two authors, but the particular author is Jose Cordero, who our neo-thinker Cody, through his Immortalist show, was able to get in contact with him through James Stroll. And he's taken by the Prime Law and by all that we're doing. And he's a good friend of Javier Milei, the president of Argentina, and we're going to be working with him more in the future and meeting with Javier Milei in Mexico City in a little over a month. But this book, The Death of Death, I'm in the process of reading it myself. It really shows you what's happening on the scientific level out there for curing aging and death. I really want you all to get caught up with that. Now, our movement, you and I, our movement is not on the scientific basis, but it's very important to get caught up with all that. We are offering something different, actually something that they all need from us. And that is, we're offering the key puzzle piece, the place where those scientists and those geniuses of society can go to really pursue what they're pursuing without being held back by the loop of the anti-civilization, the burdensome regulations, and the legislation and the litigation, that anti-civilization just yanking them back down, which happens over and over again. It's like those loop movies that you see, which I actually don't really care for because there's nothing to solve. It's just constantly just going in this loop, and that's what we've been dealing with. Population on Earth has been dealing with ever since we became conscious beings, the loop of the anti-civilization. So these geniuses out there are constantly up against the loop. The more of these people we meet, the more we see and recognize this, and the more what we have to offer is their answer, is our leverage. So yeah, we are looking to offer them a place where they can flow full steam ahead, unimpeded. Now, that's the master puzzle piece. But we also have a second puzzle piece. I call it the great goal, and that is the populace in a land-based immortalis. They will, and you all understand this, they'll live very quickly wealthy lives, healthy lives, safe lives, because with the great technological revolution, with nothing holding back progress, prices will drop, values will rise, and they'll live a very wealthy life. In the medical industry, nothing is holding it back, so cancer and heart disease and eventually aging will be cured permanently, and crime would simply become extinct in that society, in that civilization. So the great goal for people is the second puzzle piece that we have to offer. And now, what have I just described to you? Remember in my books, I write about the secret formula to curing aging. And I wrote how it's an economic formula. It's demand, supply. So these people, the populace in a land-based immortalis, they're going to live wealthy, healthy, safe lives, and it's an environment that pulls out everyone's creativity, where people will be creating values left and right, not stuck in these stagnant routine ruts. So these people will discover happiness like they've never discovered it before in immortalis. And what happens once you're living on your essence? You're happy and you don't want to die. You want immortality. There's the demand. Yes, it's an economic formula. And now the geniuses of society, the medical personnel, the scientists, the businesses, nothing's holding them back. And they're going to provide the supply to the demand. And they will achieve biological immortality at a very rapid pace. So that's what I call the beautiful ecosystem. We've talked about that. It kicks in immortalis. People supplying people's needs, desires, wants, bringing happiness to themselves and satisfaction to themselves. This is the secret formula to curing aging. This is what we have. These are the two puzzle pieces that we have that we can leverage. There's also something else that is not necessarily a puzzle piece, but we need to understand this on our journey. And that is power in numbers. Power in numbers. Did I say about powers in numbers? Well, okay, I'm going to jump past my notes here and just tell you something that recently happened. My ascenders know about this. Wallace and I were invited to a very prestigious ball at the inauguration a couple weeks ago of the President Trump being inaugurated, and we were invited to a very prestigious ball by the person in charge, the top lawyer of this very well-known billionaire. By the way, I am under an NDA, non-disclosure agreement, so I can't give you specific details other than that Milei would have been there, Javier Milei, and I would have been introduced to this well-known billionaire, who also has interests in Argentina as well. So it was really tough not to go, but it was too last minute. I had other obligations. But as the ascenders know from my dailies, that's not going to stop the long range process of what we're doing. We're just starting. We're just beginning here. So now numbers. Remember last month I talked to you about Immortalis. It demands a lot of funding. It's an expensive venture, and yet it is a nonprofit. It's a foundation, the Immortalis Freedom Foundation. So I talked to you about the engine I need to put underneath Immortalis, right? We need to put a business engine under. Immortalis itself is nonprofit, but we need to put an engine under it, an engine of business. And that does several things. One, it gives us funding. It brings us funding, the ability to fund this project, if we're successful at it, of course. And number two, it actually pulls me into Immortalis more, the project. Because I'm running a large business. I'm an author and developing very important books. So my time is limited. But if I can put an engine, a business under Immortalis, then it will pull me into Immortalis, where I really want to be and need to be. So just a little insight of something I'm starting off now in this direction. Numbers. So I have 2 million readers of NeoThink and NeoTech, 2 million readers. But over the decades, I've lost touch with a lot of them. But I do have about 100,000 very active who I am in contact with on a regular basis, about 100,000. Through this process that I'm going to, we're going to very soon have thousands and thousands of people signing up for Immortalis. So back to this ball I was invited to. This person who I have an NDA with was telling the lawyer of this billionaire that Immortalis is soon going to be the largest network state in the entire world. And I can tell you the reaction of that lawyer. It was very notable. There's power in numbers. And suddenly he said, before it was all booked and no one else can get in. Suddenly he's calling and inviting us and telling us he's made room for us at the ball and he's going to introduce me to these people. You see the power in numbers? That's a leverage we have as well. So we're going to use this power in numbers. Now, I started telling you about putting the engine of business underneath Immortalis. So here's what I'm going to, and you'll be seeing this yourself. I'm working on lifting my letter writing ability, skills, to yet another level. What I plan to do is to write a letter or a press release that introduces people to Immortalis and all the benefits of Immortalis if you become a citizen. And to become a citizen, or we might consider calling it a pre-citizen, we're still in discussions about that, it's free. It's free. And I put the barcode right on the letter so they can, boom, get there with complete ease. Then I have a PS on the letter. And the PS goes something like this. I have a couple of different approaches, but here's one that you're all very familiar with, is my longevity nutraceutical, longevity is the name of it. So I'll be saying once they go to the website and they look around, they realize, wow, they really can see the integrations, that once they're in a land-based Immortalis, that aging will be cured. Cancer will be cured, heart disease and aging. They'll be cured. Once they're in Immortalis, they'll live wealthy because the costs are going to plummet while the values soar in this country. And remember, I've talked on my YouTube channel about eventually everything becoming free, and I give you all the integrations as to why that is. I've never actually have heard that expressed before, but we have all the logic, the line of logic behind what I was revealing there. So they understand that in a land-based Immortalis, which right now we're saying is 10 years out, there's all these possibilities of health, longevity, immortality, wealth, safety, peace. And then I'll put a PS and saying, look, we want to slow down aging. We can't cure aging. yet until we have land-based immortalis, but we want to slow it down. And I give the background that you have all seen to my nutraceutical, the longevity supplement, and say this is, it is the NMN is as we call it, the Michael Jordan molecule of longevity, and this is the best thing they can be doing to slow down aging, to help them make it to the point safely into land-based immortalis, where things will just take over at that point. So I'll be offering longevity to those who I'm reaching through my direct mail program. Direct mail program is very expensive. The email program online is free, basically, so we'll be doing that. I don't even need to add a PS on those, but to the direct mail I need to, because it costs probably about $1.50 or more, just actual direct costs to do a mailing. And you say, okay, 100,000 people, well, that's like $150,000 just on direct costs, not to mention all the other operational costs that go behind that. So yes, that's going to be an approach. You'll be getting letters of this sort. Now, most of you already have longevity, so you don't feel obligated. But here's another aspect to all of this. We've been a secret society now for about a half century. And now I'm lifting the secrecy off of us. So whereas in the past you could never show my letters to anyone else and to family or friends, but now you can. When you get these letters about joining Immortalis, feel free to pass them around. The letters are worded in such a way that might even make it easier for you to introduce a friend to Immortalis and then speaking about it, because my letters are designed that way to where it will pique their curiosity. Remember, credibility and curiosity are my weapons in writing. Weapons are my secret weapon in writing brochures. Maybe weapon's the wrong word, but formula, my secret formula in writing brochures is credibility and curiosity. So here your friends can see it directly from Mark Hamilton. There's nothing wrong with that at this point. All right. And realize the more we can put an engine underneath this, the more I can reach of my active readers, and then eventually beyond my active readers to the 2 million who are floating around out there in our population. And then ultimately to the front end. That's the ultimate goal here. All right, so it requires heavy funding. Yep. All right, now I'm going to circle back to what I started this with today, what my father was involved in with Mike Oliver. And they were among the first, if not the first, to really make an effort to start a new country, a libertarian-style new country. So my father, being a world-class poker player with the world's best-selling poker manual at the time, before he left poker. And poker is the seeds of Neotech. Some of you may remember the DTC technique, the discipline, thought, control, which my father used to always look at me when I was a youngster and say, that's discipline, thought, and then control. He'd always say, and then control. So that was the DTC method in cards and poker. Then he moved beyond the card tables into the real world, and DTC more or less became fully integrated honesty, which is the core of Neotech, fully integrated honesty. When you're out there in the world using discipline, using thought, and then control, in order to do that, you have to be honest with yourself. And it requires fully integrated honesty to get rid of your laziness and dishonesty, get rid of your mysticism. That is where Neotech evolved out of his poker days, and realized, and then of course he realized that the good player, the best player in poker is the biggest loser, because he's wasting his talents and his skill and his thinking. And so he left poker, but he left it with an all-time bestseller with his poker book. And what makes that a timeless piece is the DTC method. So my father was, as this great poker player, he was an incredible negotiator. So Mike Oliver, who was the wealthy businessman who made his wealth through real estate mostly, and he really believed in gold and silver. So he would fill his safety deposit boxes with gold coins. And by the way, the history of Mike Oliver is quite incredible. He was, during World War II, he was put in concentration camps. He's Jewish, his family's Jewish, and his entire family was murdered. I think only Mike and his sister made it out. He had several siblings, and his parents were all murdered by the Nazis. And he made his way to America, changed his name to Mike Oliver, and became a very wealthy businessman. And he used his wealth to finance his new country efforts. But remember now, he made his money through real estate. That's where he really made his money, in Nevada and in California. Now, my father being this expert negotiator, Mike sent my father and my father's friend, Nick Peterson, who some of you may know by his pen name of Ted Nicholas. He's written several books. Obviously, they're all 3 passed now. But my father, being this expert negotiator, started off in the Turks and Caicos Islands, negotiating with the local authorities, the local government. But through his skill, he was able to raise that to another level and another level. And before you know it, he was negotiating with the British government. And the British government actually was going to give this Turk and Caicos substantial piece of land. And I want to say an island, but having been 12 years old at the time, I'm not clear on if it was a complete island or part of an island, but I do believe it was an island in the Turks and Caicos for not just sovereignty, but recognized sovereignty. Now that's a big word, recognized sovereignty. He had negotiated recognized sovereignty with the British government. I don't want to say too much here. Our friend Mike Oliver just passed away, I found out just a little over a month ago. And it's a shame I didn't know that he was still alive. I just always assumed he had passed because I would have, back in September when we launched, I would have definitely reached out to him. This whole experience as a 12-year-old really planted the seed in me to what now, I call it the 50-year cycle, is coming true through Immortalis. The seed has grown. It's always been in me, and all the pieces to the puzzle had to come together, including the 12 Visions Party a dozen years ago, that we went through that process. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But at the moment of purchase of the piece of land, there was more or less, now, as a 12-year-old hearing this from my father over 50 years ago, I'm just going to say what I believe happened. My father, and what my father believed happened in his opinion. My father's opinion was that Mike really, as a land developer, was looking more for an island to build beautiful hotel resorts and have it more or less self-govern itself. Whereas my father had a bigger vision. He had what we're doing now. He had in his mind. He had Immortalis in his mind. He had the new medical mecca of the world, the new industrial center of the world for a great technological revolution. That's what he had in his mind. And that, I believe, is the actual, from what I've heard, what derailed the project. Now, it was said that Mike Oliver's safety deposit boxes were broken into, and a lot of his gold and fortune had been stolen. And I don't know what did or didn't happen or the facts, But I'm just telling you, I know what my Father had in his mind. And what he had in his mind is what you and I, and my family, my personal family, and my Neothink family are doing right now with Immortalis. So it's been a seed that's grown for 55 years. We are, up and running. We need funding, and we're working on that angle. And we have some amazing things happening with Wallace heading off the day after tomorrow to Roatan, Honduras, to give a speech there, because we've been a secret society for all these years. So no one really knows who we are. But I'll tell you, the leverage that I just explained to you, the power in numbers, is going to get a lot of recognition very quickly in our two puzzle pieces, because that's what these scientists, these medical people, the geniuses of society, they need us. They need what we are going to bring to the world. So we're going to make ourselves known starting next week. What day do you speak on? Well, the 7th. Which day is that? So, is that
it's next Friday.
Next Friday. Okay. So less than a week from today. Basically, this is our coming out. So Wallace will be telling the space of freedom lovers, of people who desire free economic zones, or chartered cities, or crypto dynamics. All of this is coming to point straight at us now, Immortalis. So that's happening next week. All right, so now I've told you the fuller story of the 50-year cycle, or 55-year cycle, I guess we can call it. Now I want to, I want to get into a little bit here about some notables. Ayn Rand, Murray Rothbard, Frank R. Wallace, Milton Friedman, Ludwig von Mises. And I'm going to start right here with Thomas Paine. So I read Thomas Paine's Common Sense again the other day. And every time I read Common Sense, something really sticks out at me, jumps out at me every time. And I can't get over it. It's after I'm done reading, it's just this one thing keeps swirling around in my mind. And that's his focus on simplicity. On simplicity. You know how it all starts where, it's just a group of people living together and it's kind of a desolate area, and then it grows a little bit. Then they have enough to come together under this beautiful tree, and they sort of talk about how they're going to govern their community. And he goes on, and then he slowly and very brilliantly starts bringing in the idea that as this community grows, it gets more difficult, the governance becomes more and more difficult. And he basically leads up to the point that with complexity of government comes corruption. I'm just jumping forward in Common Sense here. And that really sticks out in my mind, and I never fully knew why that stuck out so dramatically in my mind. The whole concept of this word simplicity. Now, I'm going to call up here on chat a person. I'm going to read one quote, and I think you'll know who he is. So here it is. Our life is frittered away by detail. Simplify, simplify, simplify. I'm sure that gave it away. I say, let your affairs be as 2 or 3, and not 100 or 1,000. Instead of 1,000,000, count half a dozen, and keep your accounts on your thumbnail. Y'all know who that is? Well, unfortunately, you're all muted, but it's Henry Thoreau. Simplify, simplify, simplify. All right, so the great Henry Thoreau. And now we have the great Thomas Paine. Whether he realized it or not, to me, the theme in Common Sense is simplicity. So keep that in mind here, simplicity. I'm going to throw in a metaphor, and then I'm going to wrap this whole concept together. So here's the metaphor. Take the entire universe of mass and energy, the entire universe. The whole thing has its grand cycle. The whole universe, all the mass and energy is doing what it's doing, and it's in the expansion cycle. Then it will be sucked back into the contraction cycle, right? It's all this unmeasurable mass of energy and mass out there, but it all came from something so simple called the point of singularity. Now think about it. All of the laws of nature could be completely different with a different moment in time and a point of singularity. But all the laws of nature that we deal with, all were birthed from the point of singularity. So something so massive and complex as the universe came from something so simple. Now, let me say that that's mass and energy. Now I want to talk about consciousness. And consciousness, you have read in Insight 3, which was my father's long wave or grand cycle, how consciousness actually becomes the controlling component of mass and energy. How consciousness is the component of the cosmos that Einstein missed and barely missed. So consciousness quickly takes over mass and energy. And we've proven that, we've seen that, we know about that, how on Earth, I've talked about how it took us 3,000 years to control a river on a large scale, the Colorado River and Hoover Dam. Then 33 years later, we were on the moon. So consciousness quickly takes over mass and energy. So this brings me back to simplicity. The consciousness that has surpassed their nuclear decision threshold, we know, could only do that by our point of singularity, which is the prime law. Because initiatory force no longer exists in the civilization of the universe. Because if it did, all civilizations that didn't eliminate initiatory force, that irrationality, right? That immorality, that irrationality, civilizations that do not put an end to that irrationality, well, they end up in nuclear holocaust. They destroy themselves. They destroy their consciousness, and therefore they don't join the civilization of the universe. So, what's the point of singularity of the civilization of the universe? It's the prime law. It's the prime law. Now, I'm pulling a lot together here, and I'm bringing it all back, giving a lot of credit here to Thomas Paine. And then I'm going to give credit to a number of other people. But Thomas Paine and his focus on simplicity. Well, nothing is more simple than the prime law. Nothing. I mean, the complexity of countries' governments. Just take our swamp, our cult for a moment. The millions and millions of pages of regulations and laws and litigation that exist in our complex government. Any government in the world, the complexity, the swamp, right? The initiatory force. The prime law can run the civilization of the universe, the entire consciousness throughout the entire universe from about 100 words. So this goes back to Thoreau. Not a million count, a half dozen count. Right? Not a million count, half a dozen. That's what the prime law is. It's the zenith of freedom through simplicity. It's the zenith of freedom through simplicity. All right, so now this brings me to the philosopher Ayn Rand and to the economist Murray Rothbard. Okay. And I just want to backtrack here, a point on my notes too. And what makes the prime law so simple is that it's the fundamental, as I've always told you, it's the fundamental of protection underneath everything. That's all you need. You just need the fundamental, and then you can spawn the entire civilization of the universe. Any country, any civilization can run by the prime law. Any number of people. I'm talking about 300 million people, 8 billion people. So I'm going from country to world to, we don't know how many conscious beings out there in the civilization universe, but every bit of it can be run by the prime law. All right, now to Ayn Rand and the economist Murray Rothbard. So Ayn Rand formed objectivism, out of which neotech evolved. Murray Rothbard is an economist. Ayn Rand's philosopher, Murray Rothbard, is an economist. And just before I tell you, it just was the craziest coincidence. I graduated from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas with a Bachelor of Science in Economics and a minor in Journalism. I graduated, I think it was in 1980, 81. And wow, if not 5 years or 6 years after I graduated, of all people, Murray Rothbard became a professor at UNLV. And he taught there until the day he died. It just blew my mind. From 1986 to 1995, I just couldn't believe that basically the founder, or one of the founding fathers of libertarianism, was teaching at UNLV, my alma mater. It just was, it was a shock to me. But later I realized why. He preferred teaching in that environment as opposed to, say, like an Ivy League school where he would have restrictions all upon him. So he was free to really be who he was and to bring out anarcho-capitalism. That's what he's the father of, anarcho-capitalism, which you ascenders know I changed the name, or I used the name pure capitalism. Not that there's anything wrong. Anarcho-capitalism is absolutely the way to go. However, too many people recoil. They have a knee-jerk reaction. They pull back from the idea of anarchy. It's like chaos and crazy drug cartels running the country. That is what goes into people's minds, and that's not at all what anarcho-capitalism is. So I just changed it to pure capitalism. Pure capitalism. But it's amazing to me. And when I was at UNLV, one of the prominent economic professors there, I'm telling you right now, he was a socialist. And he and I used to get into some heated debates during class. And the reason I would do that is, I was young, 18 to 21, I think, while I was there. And he... And I would look around the room. I think I've written about this before. I'd look around the room. Oh, okay, so this is a true, you saw this in Super Puzzle. This actually happened to me. I think it was with Danny in Super Puzzle. But I would look around the room and I'd see these young faces, 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds. And I'd see him spewing this crap into their minds, and I'd see just how open their minds were to receive what this anti-life professor was putting into these trusting young people's minds. I just couldn't take it. So I started, he and I did not get along. We did not like each other, but I would not let him get away with preaching socialism to a classroom full of 18 and 19-year-olds. So what a beautiful shift from that guy to Murray Rothbard. So I envied what those economic students got after I was out of UNLV. But Murray, he was one of the most influential figures in Austrian economics and was one of, if not the prominent father of libertarianism. All right, so by the way, Rothbard versus Rand. Unfortunately, this is something that neotech and neothink overcomes very quickly. There was a very unpleasant dispute between Rand and Rothbard during their lives. You see, Ayn Rand believed in very limited government that's there just to protect you. In fact, the other day I read a passage from The Virtue of Selfishness, and it's really like I'm reading the very roots underneath the prime law. All of these people are roots under the prime law. That's why the prime law is so planted, it can't just blow away. It's got all these roots underneath it. It's got Rand, it's got Rothbard, it's got Wallace, it's got von Mises, it's got Friedman and Friedman's son David Friedman. It's just got powerful roots. It goes all the way back to Aristotle and Voltaire and the founding fathers and John Locke. All of these are roots holding the prime law down to where it can't blow away, where the socialists or the communists can't come and blow it. It's just got too much roots, and we must understand and recognize our roots. And I was reading this passage, actually Frankie brought it to me the other day out of The Virtue of Selfishness, and I'm like, wow, you see where this prime law, where it grew out of these incredible people. Rand and Rothbard, though, they had and objectivists, philosophers, and libertarians had their wars and differences, just like you remember the objectivists and the early neo-techers had the flame wars on the Usenet groups, on the computer in the early days of the internet. And it's just so unfortunate. All of this can be solved by just rising up to the zenith of what all of these people have done, and that is the prime law. It's the zenith of freedom. It's taking all that they've done and it's bringing it up to the zenith of freedom. All right, so now I mentioned our founding fathers. They did miss the prime law, and I do believe they were very close to getting the prime law, but they were under enormous pressure. The early country, where we were very heavily in debt. We'd lost many, many able-bodied men. The Articles of Confederation could not hold the colonies together, not any longer. We had a constitution, but then we went into the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists, the Bill of Rights. And, I've given speeches on how the Bill of Rights was not needed. It was the prime law that was needed. The Bill of Rights are adding positives, and rights and positives are killing America today. But removing the negative was the key. And that Thomas Jefferson did not like doing the Bill of Rights, but he thought he had no choice. The country was going to fall apart. Had they not satisfied both the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. That was a struggle between power in the states and the people versus centralized government, and there's a power struggle. And I do believe back in those days, it wasn't for personal power as you see in the swamp today. It was more from a more benevolent base of how is this country going to survive in the future. It was really coming from that base. And without the very fundamental of protection, the prime law, they did the best that they could, and boy, was it great. But now, now it has been falling apart under the swamp. What under Thomas Paine has brought to everyone's attention the complexities of government. So the Founding Fathers missed that key puzzle piece to the super puzzle. But now, and I'm going to say Murray Rothbard actually came closest to the prime law of anyone. But he was working off roots as well. He was working off Ayn Rand. He was working off Voltaire. He was working off John Locke as well. So we're all working off roots, and we all must recognize our roots. We can't, and by the way, that's a little problem with which Neotech and Neothink have never had. Problem with some of these prominent people is that they have egos, and they want to protect their ego. For example, Ayn Rand would not acknowledge people too close to her time. She'd always acknowledge Aristotle. Well, what about John Locke? What about Voltaire? What about our founding fathers? You see, there's ego. There's always ego. Ayn Rand had a problem with ego, and I understand it with her background and what she escaped from. She had to have a big ego. But that's the thing that Neotech and Neothink wipes out is ego. Why? Fully integrated honesty. Remember, Neotech, fully integrated honesty. With fully integrated honesty, you can let go of all those personal mysticisms that block and get in the way. And there was a power struggle between Ayn Rand and the libertarians. Ego. They didn't have Neotech yet. They didn't have fully integrated honesty to remove their mysticisms. All right, now, the modern-day libertarian movement, largely started by the likes of Murray Rothbard. Well, I'm going to say this. They do not necessarily miss the prime law concept. They don't necessarily miss it. They actually are pretty right on. They have this down about understanding that the evil of mankind is initiatory force. The libertarians have really nailed that. And they do rail against the state, and they rail against initiatory force. But I'm going to say something very important here, and it's worth repeating in your mind several times throughout your life. In life, in business, in politics, format can mean everything. A little quick example of that is, say, like in your business, all these time management, hundreds of books on time management. I used to read them all back in the 80s. But it wasn't until I formatted time management into the many-day system and the many-day power thinking team working together that the real power of time management was able to surface, you see. So format here, this is crucial. Format is the key, and this is what, unfortunately, the modern-day libertarians miss or lack. They understand the problem with initiatory force. But they don't package it into a format capable of an inflection point. And that's what we need here, an inflection point. We need an inflection point into a standalone law that is to be the supreme law of any civilization and the constitution of any country. After all, it is the constitution of the Sea of U, of the universe. So that's where the modern-day libertarians are missing the key puzzle piece. They're missing the format. You see, they're operating in the system, bouncing around like a pinball in a pinball machine, saying, oh, no, you shouldn't use initiatory force here on this. Oh, no, on this policy you shouldn't use. Oh, no, on this decision there shouldn't be. Oh, no, and they're like a pinball. Boom, 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 right? And they're never going to get anywhere because you have to have a fundamental law, the format, a tool to blanket wipe out initiatory force. And that's the prime law. So, yes, the libertarians are trying to work within a force-filled system. And they're so they're trying to work within a force-filled system, piece by piece, this by that, and that's not going to do it. They need the format, they need the tool, they need the prime law. So we must step completely out of that bad system that we're just bouncing around in. We need to step out of that to form a new system. You see, this is leading us to Immortalis with a prime law constitution. We need a new dimension of civilization by having the supreme law and constitution the prime law. The zenith Okay, get this. The prime law is the zenith of freedom, which means it's the zenith of objectivism. It means it's the zenith of libertarianism. It means it's the zenith of neotech. What I'm trying to do is bring the fuller understanding and meaning and power behind what the prime law is, because this is going to affect how we move. Excuse me. It's going to affect how we move going forward. So Rand, Rothbard, Wallace, it all comes down to putting the belief, the philosophy, the economics of a no initiatory force into the ultimate format to sweep away all force. That format is the prime law. Now remember, I'm known for taking an idea system, neotech, and bringing it into the real world with my neothink techniques, and that's exactly what I'm doing with Immortalis and its prime law constitution. I'm taking all of this. I'm taking Rand, objectivism. I'm taking Rothbard, libertarianism. I'm taking Wallace, neotech. And I'm taking it into the real world through neothink as a technique, as a tool to bring us pure freedom. Okay, so, and some of you might be thinking, some of you who've been with me for quite a while might be thinking, well, what was that about with 12 Vision's party a dozen years ago? So if you remember with the TVP, the 12 Visions party, our entire effort was not to, say, like, govern the United States of America. If you remember, the entire effort was the 28th Amendment. Remember that? It was to put the prime law in our Constitution as the 28th Amendment. And now what happens there, once the prime law is an amendment to the Constitution, it becomes the Constitution de facto. Because every law, every regulation, every litigation has to pass through that filter, the filter of no initiatory force. So that, you see what I was doing there? That was the genius behind that movement, was to just concentrate on the prime law, only on the prime law, on making it a 28th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. That was the whole idea behind the 12 Visions Party. Yeah, that would remove initiatory force. And by the way, I put this in a Daily Prime the other day, that as we launch Immortalis, I want you to pay attention to something. As we actually get to that point, and my goodness, I do hope that point is not 10 years out. I'm just telling you, that's where my focus is now. But once we get to that point, let's just say it's 2 years out. Please, don't even hold me to that. This is a hypothetical. And the results that we will get with an Immortalis, with the type of country that my father envisioned with the Turks and Caicos, what I envision with Immortalis, with it growing into an industrial empire, into a technological hub, to the medical mecca of the world. As this Immortalis grows and grows, and people become wealthy, and everyone in the world wants to start moving to Immortalis, and the great brain drain happens. Well, you watch how the entire rest of the world is going to want to be part of this. You watch how constitutions put in the prime law as their amendment. The amendment will become our 28th Amendment. Full circle. From Immortalis back to the United States of America. And that's what I meant the other day on my Thursday Daily Prime when I said, with Immortalis, we will have the whole world behind us. Okay, now, this brings me back to Thomas Paine, because this is really quite profound. What Thomas Paine was searching for in common sense was something I call eternal simplicity. I'll say it again. Eternal simplicity. Now, I've thought about this, and I've realized that you can't have eternal without simplicity. In fact, I've realized this is an axiom. You can't have eternal without simplicity. You can't have eternal with complexity. And that was the point, political point, Thomas Paine was making in Common Sense. That every country, once it goes from simple to complex, the government I'm talking about, the civilization will eventually collapse under the complexity, under the swamp. And the only thing that will revive the populace at that point will be a revolution. And that pretty much is what's always happened throughout human history. But it doesn't have to follow that pattern once you understand eternal simplicity. And that's what the prime law is. It's eternal simplicity. The prime law is the master puzzle piece behind any freedom movement, behind any, the crypto guys out there, or the free economic zones, the Prosperas, the chartered cities, behind any freedom movement out there. The prime law is the master puzzle piece. And why is that? Because prime law is the zenith of freedom. It is eternal. It is eternal simplicity. So now I'm going to be talking to powerful people in the freedom movement space. And I'm going to talk to people about the idea of joining a prime law coalition, where we all adopt the prime law as our common denominator. Well, can you imagine the focus on the prime law if I could pull this off? We're all freedom seekers, and the prime law is the zenith of freedom. Prime law is the fundamental measure of all criminal law and civil law. It is the quintessential in simplicity. It's the easiest and soundest form of governance that ironically needs no government. It is beautiful in its simplicity that easily covers the greatest complexities of large civilizations. Whereas the complexities of growing governments brought the corruption and collapse of conscious civilizations, the simplicity of the prime law will bring the explosive success of conscious civilizations. Today's complex governments, in other words, the corrupt swamp, cannot be fully fixed and freed from the inside, not without the prime law. But big governments won't have any openings for the prime law, not now. Whereas a powerful libertarian such as Javier Milei, the president of Argentina, is doing amazing things in Argentina, he cannot fully do what his hero, Milton Friedman, wrote about doing to the extent Milei would like to do in free market principles and limited government intervention. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to pull all this back to Javier. As I mentioned earlier, I've recently been working under an NDA with a prominent individual in the free economic zone and charter state space. I can't say too much other than to say that he is accompanying my son Wallace in Prospera in Roatan, Honduras in just a couple of days. And he will accompany me as well in Mexico City, where I'll meet Javier Milei in March. And I want to hold this up again. And I'll also be meeting Jose Cordero, who is a very close friend to Javier Milei. And he's the one who is actually going to be introducing me to Javier. Please get his book, The Death of Death. You'll really be glad you did. It's a wonderful, exciting read. I'm about halfway through it myself. Please pick that up on Amazon, The Death of Death, Jose Cordero. And he's co-author with David Wood. Jose Cordero and David Wood. So in Mexico City, I'll be accompanied by this fellow I just mentioned, who's very high up there in the whole charter city space. I'll be meeting with Jose Cordero. Cody will be there with me, Cody Dean. And he brought me together with Jose through his Immortalist show through James Stroll. So it's going to be an exciting time. Now this fellow who I'm under an NDA with has told me, we've had these conversations about the Prime Law. He loves the Prime Law, and he's doing something quite exciting involving the Prime Law, which I can't reveal. But now he's informed me, and he's the expert in this field, he's informed me that it would be very unlikely and a very difficult road to try to establish criminal law in any chartered city or free economic zone. He said that would be a huge hill to climb. And whereas he's fully on board with the Prime Law, he recommends taking it easy on approaching things from that angle. Yet I've got to tell you too, I do, and I always have, trusted my right brain. And my right brain is telling me that I feel, as he said, it's a very difficult road to travel. I feel it is a road Milei might be willing to consider, like an experiment and perhaps a legacy. After all, America was an experiment, was it not? So we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes. But I've expressed to you today really what the Prime Law is. It's the zenith of freedom. I think people out there are going to recognize that as I express this to them as well. That covers my notes for today. It was really, really wonderful spending this time with you, about an hour. I'm going to turn this back over to Josh, but I want you to know something. I want to let you know that I so cherish your comments after these meetings that, that evening I always sit down and enjoy my evening watching your comments. It's a wonderful way to spend a Saturday evening. And I love your integrations, and I love the soulmate nature that we have. I love what you bring to the table. I love what you have to say about your history with Neothink and what that's meant to you and Neotech and Neothink. In fact, I love it so much that when I put these speeches up on my YouTube channel, you're not on those. So I'm starting a YouTube channel now to put your conversations and comments after these meetings up on YouTube. So I'll let you know soon. Josh will let you know. Wallace will let you know what channel that is and when we start putting up your comments and your wonderful integrations. So the world can enjoy what I enjoy every Saturday evening after I give one of these talks to you. So I just really appreciate that. I appreciate all of you so much. I really do love all of you very much. You're my family. You're my Neothink family. I guess that's it, Josh. I'm going to turn it back over to you. Wallace and I have a lot to do. He's leaving Monday, day after tomorrow. And we have to get on getting him ready for his speech, our coming out speech, Neothink Immortalis to the free space world. So, Josh, with that, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you, everyone.